For more on this, we're joined by Amnesty International's America's Deputy Director for Research, Valentina Ballesta. Very good evening to you, and thank you so much for speaking to us.
Hi, thank you, and hello to your audience as well.
So how does Amnesty frame what has just happened?
Well, we have called this an act of aggression by the US, meaning that the incursion of military operation from a foreign country into Venezuela breaches international law. However, like our main concern right now remains in a human rights situation in Venezuela, the policy of repression that is still in place there, and how even what happened with the US may not relieve at all the human rights situation on the ground, but the opposite, that it would create all this fear and this uncertainty around the next steps, and that repression still takes place, meaning arbitrary detentions, enforced disappearances, and torture that we have documented for the last 6 to 7 years.
And one would say this is quite a twist, the fact that Maria Machado is saying that her opposition colleague, that is Juan Pablo Guanipa, has been kidnapped, given the fact that from the world's eyes, she's been set up to take over from Nicolás Maduro and is supposed to do the bidding of the United States. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, we've been seeing, well, first of all, Guanipa, this political leader, he was actually released 2 days ago by the government because he was under their custody, under an arbitrary detention, politically motivated arbitrary detention. And just, I think it was not more than 24 or 48 hours after he's released, he was again re-arrested, let's say. And the Attorney General's office has issued a press release saying that he has supposedly, allegedly, breached the conditions under which he was put into freedom, let's say. However, what we are seeing as Amnesty International, and this is our main call right now, is that the apparatus of repression is still in place. Therefore, whatever or whomever is freed is going to be subject to the same arbitrariness as they were subjected in the first time when they were arrested. So until we don't see specific guarantees of non-repetition, it's going to be very hard to call or to assess the situation in Venezuela as one in which human rights are guaranteed and respected.
And the fact that you have these arrests and releases and re-detention, what does it speak to, given the fact that Maduro was removed forcibly and it was under the guise of seeking a transition? But what does it say if the security forces there are also committing the same arbitrary detentions and rumored tortures? And I want to also understand the understanding of Venezuela's global legitimacy and how is it shaping domestic reconciliation with these kind of events continuing.
Yeah, precisely. That's exactly the point. What has happened in Venezuela is the removal of a person who was in the government. However, the whole apparatus around him, the vice president, who is now president in charge of Venezuela, and the security forces and the Ministry of Interior, they are all still in power. And that the government of Nicolás Maduro will drastically change only by removing the head of the government, it is, at least to say, naive, because right now what we are seeing is there's still many things to see on how they will reaccommodate in this to trying to withhold power, let's say. But the main individuals who are still in power were in power before, and were the ones taking also the decisions on whether and whom were going to be detained, arrested, tortured, etc. So right now, it is too soon to believe that this will end in a beneficial, yeah, or a happy ending for the Venezuelans.
And what mechanisms exist not only for monitoring internally and externally? If and I'm also keen to understand your understanding of the composition of Venezuela's government at the moment. Do you have an even mix of hardliners and reformers? And how is this going to be possible, just in terms of turning around what critics of Venezuela, who said that it was an illegitimate government, to something that can be legitimate?
Yeah, well, it is. They have in the government of Venezuela right now. They have presented themselves as a unity of power, and there are some signs whether that there are some initiatives, whether this comes after the U.S. pressure over Venezuelan government, or I don't know, to try to to transition to something different. However, what we have seen, for example, is the release of arbitrary detentions, as I said before, but then all these go comes and forth. Yeah, this it is a very complicated situation at the moment, knowing exactly where this is going to end. However, what we have seen in the past is that the government and the people who are still there has been very very effective, although that's an awful word to use in this context, to silence any form of dissent that does not comply with the plan that they have. So it is hard for human rights groups to see whether this is going to end differently this time.
And I want to talk about there obviously has been widespread criticism of what has been noted as flouting international rules-based order. Now, the role of the diaspora, Venezuelan diaspora, in shaping the future of Venezuela. There are those who are influential figures, say, in Canada's oil sector and other regional entities or in other countries. What is their role or influence on shaping bilateral relations or foreign policy interests in Venezuela at the moment?
Well, there's a huge diaspora, as you mentioned, of Venezuelans. Right now, we are talking about 1/3 of the country that has fled Venezuela in looking for international protection, and 1/3 of Venezuelans not being all of them politicians, obviously. So, and however, what's happening right now is that many of them want to return to the country, or aspire or aim to return to the country. However, as I was saying before, it is very difficult right now to see whether the repression is receding or whether they are still going after anyone who is perceived as critics. And also the economic and social circumstances and the complex humanitarian emergency that Venezuela has been immersed in the past, almost 10 years is also one important issue that is still playing a role, whether Venezuelans go back to the country or not. However, I will make a point here in how the multilateralism right now needs to play an important role. We have been, as Amnesty International, we have been calling for a specific mandate of the fact-finding mission of the Human Rights Council, and they have been doing an amazing job documenting human rights violations and crimes against humanity happening in the country. And this is now the time for these multilateralisms to react, like to put their eyes and their oversight over Venezuela, because right now is the most important moment for justice and for victims to receive any sort of redress and guarantees of non-repetition.
Valentina, we really thank you for taking the time to speak to us and just sharing your thoughts as Amnesty International